Dr. Edwards has left me with very little to say for my own introduction. I want to sort of give a little bit of a background to where this study comes from. This study is part of the dissertation work that I've been doing in the composition program. And it comes out of my interest in how we teach research processes as part of writing processes. What's the intersection between those two? What's the alignment between those two? What is going on in students' minds as they are moving from doing research processes into doing writing processes? How do they make those processes productive for themselves? I have this interest because as I was beginning my work as a scholar in my undergraduate years, I worked in both a library and a writing center at Concordia University. So I had very direct experiences of how these two fields of inquiry were pursuing similar paths, but weren't necessarily talking to each other as they were pursuing those paths. There were definitely silos going on between the field of information literacy and the discipline of rhetoric and composition. But as I said, I could see how these two areas have overlapping professional goals, how it is that they have common goals of increasing students' critical thinking skills, increasing students' ability to listen to what's going on in conversations, to reflect on what's going on in those conversations, and then to make their own participations and contributions into those conversations in fruitful ways. Many information literacy researchers were conducting studies, as I was looking at the literature, that were drawing on work that was happening in composition classrooms. They were taking pieces out of English 101 classes and then analyzing them with frameworks, literally frameworks, from professional organizations like the Association of College and Research Libraries. But they weren't necessarily trying to educate themselves about what the field of rhetoric and composition had to say about research, how it is that Rhet Comp perceived research papers as being valuable, what their pedagogical goals were in assigning research papers. And so by not drawing on Rhet Comp, I felt that information literacy's work was not as rich as it could be. And the flip side as well for rhetoric and composition, having myself worked in information literacy and being very familiar with the frameworks that are used in that field, as I think about educating students to be critical information consumers, thoughtful about what are people's motives and goals behind putting information into the world, and then what are the students' motives and goals behind adding more information to the world. I saw Rhet Comp not delving into that as deeply as they could, taking the time to really dwell in that research moment with students, and I felt maybe rushing too quickly onto the writing process part of it, to creating the product of the research paper. I'm aware of maybe 3 or 4 researchers other than myself who are intentionally trying to take both of these fields of inquiry and put them into conversation with each other with the goal of trying to build a deeper understanding of what's going on for students in those research/writing processes. There's Doug Brent, there's Heidi and Dale Jacobs, for those 3. There's a handful of other people who every so often seem to almost dip their toe in and then actually start reading the articles, and it starts to very quickly become either just straight information literacy or straight rhetoric and composition. So what I'm doing here, I recognize, has not a lot of work already done around it, but I'm hoping that the work that I'm doing will start to generate more conversations as we move forward into the future, starting with some of the conversations around this table today. Before I move any further, is everyone able to see the screen okay? Because if not, I do have some little packets of the slides that I'd be happy to pass around to make that easier. There's only 3 of them if you're calling them. Okay. There are also handouts around the table. It seems like most people have gotten those.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other major component that is part of my research work is considering student voices and how it is that student voices can be part of informing our scholarly discourse around writing and around researching. So for me, as I'm working on my studies, my goals are to draw on IL, information literacy, and WS writing studies theories to examine the research/writing processes. I put that slash between them intentionally. I see them as being intertwined, so I try to intertwine them in my text. And to then request and present students' own articulations of their research writing processes so that I can try to consider what their perceptions are, not just what a scholarly field's perceptions of these experiences are. What I'm going to present today is some work that I've been doing around just a couple of research questions. My dissertation study is much bigger than what I'm presenting here for the sake of time and for the sake of, I hope, having a richer conversation on a more focused bit of it. I'm just wanting to talk about a couple of my questions. So one question that I have as I'm pursuing this is, what would students say about their research process and how it influences their writing process, and about themselves as researchers and writers? And how do students evaluate their information sources? To pursue answers to those questions, I designed a curriculum that was implemented in English 1020, that's essentially our version of English 101, our basic composition course here at Wayne State, in the winter 2017 semester. Part of that curriculum was that I gave the students a series of journals to answer. During 8 weeks of the course, when they were working on two major research projects, each week that they were working on those projects, they also were asked to respond to journal questions. There were 8 journal prompts total across those 8 weeks. For the sake of getting more specific answers to those particular questions, I chose to only analyze 4 of the journal prompts. The 4 journal prompts are reproduced for you in figure 1 at the top of your handout. One of the journal prompts I call a definition journal prompt. That definition journal asks the students to tell me what makes an information source good or useful. Are there things you consistently look for or notice in good sources? Explain in as much detail as you can. So that's a definition journal. Another task that I asked the students to do in these journals was to track their development as researchers and writers across 3 journals. One journal that was given to them in week 1, another journal given to them in week 5, and then a third journal given to them in week 8. In week 1, they are asked, what do you think your strengths are as researchers? What do you think your weaknesses are as a researcher? Week 5 and week 8 asks them to revisit earlier journals and reflect on their progress since writing those earlier journals. So in week 5, they look back at the journal from week 1, talk about how they have developed, and in week 5, they are first explicitly asked to think about what is going on for them as a writer as well as a researcher. I will say when the students responded to that week 1 journal, they were still talking about themselves as a writer. They're in a writing class. That's just part of the overall dialogue that's going on in the class. But week 5 is where I explicitly started to have them think about what's going on as an interaction between your research and your writing processes. To analyze these journal responses, I followed a process of descriptive and grounded coding. There were 76 responses to the definition journal, and then 84 students wrote 209 responses to those 3 development journals. I took all of those responses to those journals, downloaded them off of their course websites, and then uploaded them into the Deduce coding platform. Once they were there, I started to work on developing coding schemas by following, as I said, a grounded process, by looking at what the students were using to name and describe themselves as researchers and writers, and then to use their terminology to categorize their thoughts across the journals. I also did this in 2 stages. Stage 1 was to develop and then apply major themes and codes to the extracts as I was creating them. So say in one journal, a student maybe talked about, first described a research strength and then described a research weakness and then talked about themselves as a writer. That's 3 major codes that were applied to that prompt, and each one of those was an extract within that prompt. Then I took all of the extracts, so say all of the extracts where students were talking about their research strengths, and I began to develop subtopics or secondary codes. What are the specific things that they are naming as being their research strengths? Out of all of this, I created 356 extracts across all of the definition journals and 848 across all of the development journals. The schemas that I created included 11 major codes and 2 subcodes for the development journals, and 10 major codes and 24 subcodes for the development journals. This is why I'm not trying to explain everything that's going on to you guys today, just a couple of things that are going on today, a couple of things that I'm learning out of this process of developing my coding schema, and then looking at what insights come out of that coding process. As I said, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that I've learned as I'm looking at these journals, the results that have been coming out of my analysis, and as I'm talking through these things, I'm going to ask you to refer to tables 1 and 2 on your handout. So as we look at Table 1 reflects the coding that was applied to the definition journals. These are the 11 codes, and 2 subcodes that were applied to the definition journals. looking at these, we can see that at the top of the chart, there's a few codes that are occurring with a high frequency. Information/content, author, and then credible/unbiased are terms that students are frequently using to describe what it is that makes a source good or useful. These are the things that they are aware of and that they are tracking across their sources with the highest level of frequency. There are other aspects of what makes a source good or useful that students are also looking at. They just occur with lower frequency, not as frequently across those extracts. Another insight that I'm sort of gaining as I look at these, look at my coding schemas and what are the results of my coding process, is when we get to the development journals, where students are asked to consider how they are growing and developing as researchers and as writers. Students are describing strengths and weaknesses for each. There was enough discussion of research strengths and research weaknesses that I felt it was worthwhile to split and have a separate code for each one. There was not enough discussion of writing as a strength versus a weakness that I thought it was worthwhile to split them apart. When you start considering the co-occurrences of these, research weakness co-occurs with the term writing 38% more times than research strength does with writing. Students are more frequently naming a weakness of research as being part of their writing than they are naming research as a strength as being part of their writing. So where do we go with this? How do we interpret this? How do we build meaning out of this for what we do as instructors in our classrooms? First of all, if the students are only naming a few aspects of information evaluation so frequently, that leads me to wonder if we maybe need to try to guide our students towards having greater nuance in evaluation. Students are, after all, novices at doing information evaluation. They may not have been asked to do an explicit research process at all as part of their secondary education, so this may be the first time that they're doing it, or they may have only had a chance to practice it once or twice in their high school education. So as they're selecting sources, they may be overly reliant on things like how frequently someone has published. Do they recognize an author's name, or is that name part of what's coming up frequently? Or are they, as they read an article, do they perceive that there is a lack of bias in the author's writing? This could lead them to end up neglecting voices that are that are existing and doing work outside of major publication venues or major information distribution venues. They may also end up ignoring someone who's speaking from lived experience and who is writing with emotion, allowing emotion to be part of their writing rather than feeling they need to keep that emotion separate from what they are putting out to the world in their writing. We can assist our students in developing greater nuance in their evaluation and greater variety in the sources that they choose if we help them move towards more nuanced understandings of what it means to be an author, what it means to put a publication out into the world, where it is to look for publications, and how it is that we consider the idea of what makes someone credible and what is a good definition of bias, and when would we want to distrust someone because of bias being present in their writing. Secondly, students may be better at naming weaknesses because teachers are better at doing that. Teachers are probably hyper-aware of behaviors and assignment tasks that are in need of correction. We want our students to succeed, so we pay attention to where we feel they may have a deficit or where they may need to be encouraged to do something differently. If we become myopic in this regard, we miss out on opportunities to praise and to make students aware of their strengths. And students themselves will take up the instructor's language. What we say to them, they will say back to us. If we do not give them the words to describe their strengths, then they may not be able to describe their strengths because they don't know how to recognize the strengths in themselves. Thirdly, feedback on research processes necessarily almost has to occur before the research paper is written. You can't wait until someone is at the end of a process to give them guidance and correction on how to do that process. By the time teachers are evaluating students' research papers, the research process itself is complete. Our best opportunity to guide students to greater nuance and to give feedback about research strengths is during the research process itself, not on that final product. If we can make the process a more visible part of our classroom work and of our pedagogy, and if we can give it greater attention, we open up the possibility of helping students see how to build up strengths along the way in both research and writing. So thinking towards the future, there are some goals that I believe writing instructors could work towards to improve how research is being taught in classrooms, to sort of address some of these issues that I see coming out of my analysis of the journals. Library faculty may also be a great partner in helping to design curriculum that works towards these goals and in helping to teach that curriculum. First, how can we give teachers language to better describe students' strengths? How do we give them that knowledge and that ability to diagnose what are their strengths as well as what are their weaknesses? And how do we give teachers opportunities to see and give feedback about students' research processes, since often traditionally those research processes are assigned to be completed outside of classroom time and outside of a teacher's immediate attention. So how can we potentially pull the research process back into classroom spaces and times in order to give teachers the opportunity to be a partner with a student in their research process rather than someone who's just evaluating the final product? So these are a couple of questions that I would love to chat about with you all if you are open to talk about them. If there's other questions that you'd like to talk about, I'd be happy to answer as best I can any questions that you might have, or to explain further any of the information about my methods or about what I'm finding out through my analysis. Yes?
Could you explain table 2?
Table 2? Yeah. So table 2, in the left-hand column, there's research as a strength, research as a weakness, and then writing. So as you go across the rows in the column, you see research strength co-occurs with research weakness 71 times, and research strength co-occurs with writing 50 times. And then you keep moving down. It's meant to be read row by row.
Can you give us an example of how strength and weakness would co-occur?
So there would sometimes be moments where students would say a statement like, I have not progressed. I still have the same strengths and weaknesses that I did before as a researcher.
So, Ruth, did you double code?
It is possible that one extract has multiple codes applied to it,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got 67 total for these particular, 67 total
Yeah,
who had explicit text for 1, 2, 3, and 4 in figure 1, right?
67 total for the there are 67 journals that were written in response to the definition prompt and that were then qualified for the analysis. So it's out of those 67, 42 of them mention information/content somewhere in the journal,
Okay.
in the journal response.
Right.
Do you have a theory for why audience is so small? Or should that be something that concerns us?
I think it probably should be something that concerns us as we're trying to help students think about the art of rhetoric, think about doing rhetorical analysis. So as you think about how authors modify messages to address particular audiences, if students in the rhetorical analysis are explicitly taught to think about that, to think about how authors are tailoring messages to audiences, that can potentially impact how it is that they would think through whether or not to use a research source. It would maybe impact them thinking about how is an author displaying bias or not displaying bias. There's ways that it could impact that. And a few students, 3 of them in their journals, did mention audience, being aware of the audience and thinking about what audience is an author writing to as part of their evaluative process for sources, but it is only 3 students. So there may be a little bit of a lack of transfer going on there between our project 1 and our project 2 and 3 potentially, and that may be an area where we could do some more explicit instruction and help students bridge strengths from project 1 into project 2.
So you have your top 2 categories are
Yeah.
information content,
Yes.
which is a nice high, 62%.
Yeah.
You want it higher, but I'm intrigued by the fact that author got it had just
Yeah.
as many mentions, same kind of percentage.
Yeah.
And
And then it drops down
What-
to 34. Yeah.
what do the students mean, if you have a sense of this? What do
Yeah.
they mean by author? Could
So
that be like a website?
So I was trying to really restrain myself in thinking of author and just try to have it be moments where the student is saying is explicitly using that term, where they're saying I look for an author's name, or I search for the author to learn more about them. Like those sorts of things are the extracts that got coded with author.
Huh. Could I have you unpack another one of these?
Sure.
The platform venue
Yeah.
and the library.
Yeah.
I assume library is a subcode.
Yes, I was just
And-
curious to see what would happen with that.
Yeah. And platform venue, is that things like tweets and
Yeah.
and journals or what?
Yeah,
Did
so
they use the words platform venue?
that is one where I chose a term to capture what I had a sense the students were going for. So when I was thinking through this, students would be mentioning things like maybe that I go to like msn.com, or that I go to if there was a library, say I go to the library website or I go to the library databases to do searches. It's if they're mentioning a particular like name of a thing where they go to search. If they've said I use Google to search, Google's also captured in platform/venue.
And then just as a part of that,
Yeah.
it didn't show up here anywhere, but it does show up in other information literacy documents. Did they ever talk about going to people?
They didn't.
Okay.
And I was sad about that. Yeah.
Interesting.
What is your discussion before this process of journaling? What is your discussion with your students about what the purpose of the journals are?
So when I was collecting this data, I was not on a teaching assignment for the university, so I recruited other instructors to run this curriculum for me. I'm not entirely sure what the instructors told the students. I didn't record the class sessions. What I told the instructors was, first I checked with them that journaling was already going to be a part of their pedagogy, and then I said, here are some specific prompts regarding research and regarding writing that I think would be, one, just good for the students to have an opportunity to reflect on their research process and articulate it for themselves. But I think could also potentially lead to good classroom moments for you to be able to talk around those things and help guide your discussion of your projects 2 and 3. And they said, sure, great. And so they deploy the prompts.
Did they do it in your order?
They did.
I just wondered because I find responses to journal articles depend on how you talk about the reason for the journal.
I mean, I would agree with that certainly. As I said, I checked with the instructors to make sure that journals were going to be part of their pedagogy anyway, and I'm not sure what conversations they would have had around addressing the place of journals in their curriculum in their classrooms. I wish there had been now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that I wish I had gathered the data on now.
Can I ask you to be a little more specific about the second bullet point? So it seems to me when we think about teachers giving, or there being opportunities for teachers to see and give feedback on a student's research process,
Yeah.
we might think of something like an annotated bibliography
Yeah.
or these other kind of deliverables that can lead up to a research paper.
Yeah.
I know part of that might be, less about the student's research project and more about making sure students start work on something earlier,
Yeah.
as long as they're not trying to do everything at the last minute.
Yeah.
But you seem to be thinking of other things, right?
Yeah.
So could you
Yeah.
tell us more about what
Yeah.
might be included in those things?
I will say that so as part of my curriculum, for the 3 people in the room who don't already know this, I designed an alternate assignment 2. The standard assignment 2 in our 1020 sequence is the iSearch. I designed an alternate to that, where students were asked to research a specific topic, 1 topic per week, and to bring sources about that topic into the classroom to be able to discuss those, to discuss both the sources and discuss their search processes with the other students. I think that's one way that I can see to potentially intervene and make visible the research process itself rather than a research product, which even an annotated bibliography is still a research product rather than a research process. By the time that someone is writing annotated bibliography, they've already selected the sources that go into the annotated bib. And you can tell them this source is not going to be good enough for the research paper, go back and find more. But how have you given them information to go and find more if all you say is go find something else?
I like the question that you're asking though, because I just read an article about rhetorical listening.
Mhm.
And I think it's an important aspect of our,
Yeah.
something that we should add to our coursework
Mhm.
with our students. Because in a circle, a big
Yeah.
circle,
Yeah.
and you're discussing research methods and things like that, not only are the students receiving feedback from the teacher and other students at that moment, but instructors are receiving the disconnect between what they're trying to instruct and what the students are actually receiving.
Yeah.
So, that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah.
But I do my annotated bibliography a little different. I think I told you about it. It's a mapping thing, but
Yeah.
this I think is important, that last question.
And I don't think that I have a magic bullet kind of answer to that question yet. But I think if we just tell students, do complete a research paper and turn it into me on such and such date with so and so many sources, we're not enabling them with the knowledge and the skills and the tools that they need to be able to complete that successfully. If we aren't willing to get down into the mud with them and help them out with the research process itself. And if we just wait for the product to come to our submitted files. Do people have other questions that you'd like to talk about? Ellen looks thoughtful.
Okay, I see the questions, I'm still on table 2.
That's fine. Yeah.
I see the, you know, the numbers overall,
Yeah.
but how would you associate those with your journal prompts? Because, so you said that you did the definition journal
Yes.
prompt, everyone who handed one back in, did you follow them up, or did you have a criteria? I thought I heard you say that you know, that there was a cull
Yes.
in between definition journal prompt
Yeah.
and done. Is that?
Yeah.
And so can you explain that?
Part of it is errors in the download. That's something downloaded, and when it downloaded, it turned into gobbledygook, and I did not have access to be able to go and retrieve the
Mhm.
original back. Part of it was, I will say student error. It might have been instructor error. There were a few things that were submitted as responses to that journal prompt that were not at all answering that question.
Okay.
And so I removed those because I think that the student uploaded the wrong thing.
So you have an other, you included others, capital O, you know, so that, you know, your 67 number was the one that was going to count for week 1, week 5, and week 8.
No, the 67 number is the one that counts for the definition journal prompt. Week 1, week 5, week 8 have a different coding schema, which I did not reproduce
Okay.
here because it's
All right,
huge.
so we're just looking at the
Yes.
definition journal.
Yeah, the table 1 corresponds to the definition journal prompt. Table 2 is a small snippet of information that came out of analyzing week 1, week 5, and week 8.
And this is aggregated across the 3?
Yes, across all 3, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for not making that clearer earlier.
So to build table 2, then you took from week 1, you said, okay, so many people were
Talking about research strengths, maybe we're talking
talking about the
yeah.
strengths, and then about the wood,
Yeah.
and then writing. Can you unpack that
Yeah.
category for me?
Well, and remember, these numbers are also representing the times when these are co-occurring. There's a
Okay.
larger number than this where people are talking about just research strength. This is the number of times where something has been multiply
So if you had to have strength
and
a-
weakness
and
both
a
applied to
weakness
one
and-
extract. Yeah.
Okay. And then writing the single word, did you try to build a definition like we tried to develop it?
I was prepared. So with research strength and research weakness, I wound up subcoding them,
Okay.
creating a second layer for specific
Sure.
names of strengths and weaknesses. The students did not talk about writing at that depth, and that might be because I didn't necessarily ask for it in the prompts. But I did not feel that there was enough nuance going on in their discussion of writing to warrant developing subcodes for it. So
So did
things
you,
that are
I'm sorry. Go
things
ahead.
that are coded writing, anytime the student is saying the term writer or my writing, that sort of stuff, that extra got tagged as being writing, their discussion of writing.
Because that's pretty high.
Yeah.
And so are there more journals, or did you do week 12, week 16?
I did not. It's only 8 weeks worth. The journal prompts were tied to the particular weeks when they were doing the major research projects.
Oh, so was this a summer session?
No, it was the regular winter semester, but they have the rhetorical analysis first, and then the and then the reflective paper after. So I did not have prompts happening in those weeks.
Oh, okay, I see.
Just out of curiosity, what were some, I mean, I know it's not here, but I bet you know. What were some examples that students talk about in terms of their strengths? Or is it, if it's too
Let me
late?
read the table to you.
Okay, oh. It's just curiosity.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just more information than I can hold in my head. So when I was going through and doing the subcodes under research strength, students most frequently talked about integrating sources, so using sources to support their papers, or sort of making sources talk to each other. Getting scholarly or credible sources, their interest in the topic as being a thing that makes them do good research in the topic. Search or searching, the literal mechanics of performing a search. Analysis or evaluation, that they're good at spotting the stuff that's good or deciding that something is good to be used. Having a variety of sources, I thought that they were good at coming up with a variety of them. Those are just like the top few. There's another, the list is still like another 5 or 6 entries long, but those are the top ones.
I'm just thinking that that list
Yeah,
may work well with that second question there.
yeah,
That provides some of the ways or some of the content
Yeah.
that could go into seeing and giving feedback about students' research processes.
yeah.
And the same thing with the weaknesses, that they
Yeah.
could either be turned into strengths
Yeah.
to talk about, or they could be
Yeah.
part of how do we,
Yeah.
figuring out how do we give opportunities to talk about those topics.
Yeah, I developed the subcodes for strength and weakness separately, but the same ideas were coming up across each, that students would potentially also say, I'm not good at integrating sources, or I don't have interest in this topic, and so I don't care about researching it, and therefore I'm gonna be a weak researcher on it. So yeah, I definitely think that these could potentially be useful to instructors, for giving them ideas for how to name strengths to students, and how to sort of help students see here's a goal, here's something that you could try to achieve. Try to find a way to get a little interested in the topic. Try to find a way to develop your ability to get those scholarly sources, or to get sources that you consider to be credible.
Or even stories about how people
Sure.
do that.
Right.
You know, with, Ruth talking to each other.
Yeah.
To tell a story about, I have a strength in this area, this is how I got there.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see it maybe down the road. At some point, I think it could be really interesting to build sort of like profiles. Like, what is a person who's good at this area of research? Like, what are they doing? Do certain of these things tend to like go together in some way?
I like the way you made research visible in week 1 and week 5.
Thank you.
Because, as you said, it's harder to, and we know from the composition research committee, it's hard to figure out, it's hard to make researcher,
Yeah.
writing was fairly straightforward, but
Yeah.
trying to think about, achieving the research.
Yeah. Which is so internal to someone's
Right,
head.
yes.
Yeah.
So that was a good effort. And then in development number 8,
Yeah.
it says, look back at your journal at the beginning of your 3rd project.
Which would
Were
be the
your
week 5 one.
predictions correct? What? That seems like it seems pretty broad.
Were your predictions correct?
Yeah, I mean, they could say,
Yeah.
did you want them to go back?
They were supposed to go back to the week
Online?
5 journal, and I had better phrasing in there that more explicitly directed them back to week 5. I was just trying to save myself some space by phrasing it that way for today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that one would be, all of these would be interesting in terms of fleshing them out.
It certainly has been interesting to analyze the responses. Yeah, there were many chuckles along the way.
How long were the journal issues?
When I was giving instructions to my instructor participants, I had told them to ask the students to write what the length they would expect for any journal. And I told them if I was going to assign these, what I typically expect for my students for journals is just 1 to 3 paragraphs. And mostly the students seem to follow that expectation. They seem to be about like 1 or 2 paragraphs. Every so often there was something that was just 1 or 2 sentences. And that was, I mean, it was easier to code since it's shorter, but it was disappointing to not have the students giving more thought to their response for that particular journal. But again, it's assigning journals. It can sometimes be a little bit of a crapshoot.
So you would say that the majority of the journals were over a page?
No, they were approximately 1 to 2 paragraphs.
Oh, 1 to 2 paragraphs
Yes.
on a page, a single,
Yeah, yeah.
for most of them.
Yeah, and these were all these were also all done digitally
Right.
in their course website, and so if I was going to put them onto like a Microsoft Word document double spaced, I would say they probably would fill about 3/4 of a page on
Okay.
average.
So that's in short.
Yeah, right. Which when I assign journals, I don't necessarily expect a lot of things.
No,
so,
I don't know. I could have guessed.
Any more questions?
Just one.
Yeah.
Not, but-
Anything that surprised you?
Anything that surprised me?
Anything that surprised you? Yeah.
Nothing in a good way so far. It was from my experience of working in libraries and working in writing classrooms, I kind of had a sense that students maybe weren't being given the kind of instruction in research that I would like them to be receiving. And maybe weren't going to be able to articulate everything that I would like them to be able to articulate about what they're doing for research. And as we were just saying, there was, most of the prompts were probably about 3/4 of a page, but there were others that were just 1 or 2 sentences. And so anytime that I had hit one of those, it was another little moment of dismay of this student hasn't been given the tools and the attention that I would have wanted them to have so far in their education.
Did they count towards the grade?
Yeah, I believe that they did for all the instructors, yes.
So they got points?
Yeah, points for, I think it was mostly points for completion.
Yeah, that's.
Thank you all so much for your time and for coming.
One benefit of having a small audience is that your audience gets to ask multiple questions.
Yes, yes.
And in-depth questions. And you ask questions from composition experts.
Yes.
Who could help you